First of all, I want to start this evening with actually a quote from Jonathan Swift, a writer and a thinker. He said that vision is the art of seeing things invisible. When I first read this idea, this statement by Swift, that vision is the art of seeing things invisible, I was a little perplexed. I didn't know exactly what he meant. But then I came across a magnificent medrash, which tells us that Moshe Rabbeinu, when he first encountered the sneh, the bush, the burning bush, which will be the subject of tonight's discussion, there were other people with him, according to one view in the medrash. There were other people who were there. But it says, Vayera Elav. It only appeared to him. And that's a very special statement, because it is true that many people can see the same thing, but it's very few people who are able to take what they see and then to transform it into something which is inspirational for others. So we're going to see that in motion tonight. First of all, before we get to the bush, we're going to talk a little bit about where this Sefer of Shemot fits in. Of course, with last week's parsha, we read of the reunification of the brothers, and not only their reunification, but Yosef's forgiveness of them, because the story of Yosef, of course, is a story of forgiveness. It's a story of transformation, a story of tshuva. And that's one of the reasons why we see it as it emerges over the course of the parsha Vayeshev, Miketz, Vayigash, Vayechi, those last four parshiot of Sefer Bereshit. It took a while for these very virtues to emerge. But in the end, Yosef forgives his brothers. His brothers, as the Chazal say, told a white lie, but it was for the purpose of peace with them. And we do know now that, of course, throughout the rest of their lives, and that carried on into the lives of their children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, despite the difficulties in Egypt, that unity of the Jewish people was maintained. We'll see that it was strained. There's no question that it was strained. That's what trials and tribulations do to people. But nevertheless, ultimately, they will emerge from Mitzrayim. They will emerge from Egypt as one people. They came there as a family, and they will emerge as a people. Now, the first book of the Torah is called Genesis in English. We just call it Bereshit in Hebrew. But the Medrash often refers to the book of Bereshit, or the book of Genesis, as Sefer HaYetzirah, the book of creation. Our Sefer Shemot, which we begin this evening, is called, we call it Shemot. In English, it's called Exodus. And in the Medrash, it's called Sefer HaGeula. Also, many commentators, such as the Ramban and others, refer to it as Sefer HaGeula, the book of redemption. That the redemption came not as for individuals, but it came for the nation itself. While we're talking about the names that the Medrash gives, let's add the last three. The third of these works of the Sifrei Torah that we have is called Vayikra. It's common name. We call it Vayikra, but the Medrash calls it calls it Torah Kohanim, the laws of the Kohanim who served in the Beit HaMikdash. So when one is reading the Medrash and they say, as you find it in Torah Kohanim, we'll know that that's Sefer Vayikra. It is the third book of the Torah, Vayikra. The fourth book is called Bamidbar or Bimidbar. That's really more accurate. And it means literally in the desert. So that would work. But it's also called in the Medrash, it's called Sefer HaPekudim, the book of counting. There are two censuses in the book of Bamidbar, and therefore it draws its name Pekudim, census or numbers. And in English, we of course call the fourth book the book of Numbers. Finally, we have Sefer Devarim. In English, it would mean book of words, but that's not what we mean. Again, with each of the books in our common terminology, it becomes, the name of the book is taken in its common terminology from one of the key words in the first pasuk or two. Oftentimes it's within the first 2 or 3 words. The Sefer Devarim actually is called Devarim, and it actually has the word Devarim in Eila Had Devarim. These are the words, and so therefore it derives its common name from there. But the Midrashic name is Mishneh Torah, the repetition of the Torah, meaning to say that there are 613 mitzvot in the Torah. Most of them, the great majority of them, are given in the book of Shemot, Vayikra, Bimidbar. In Sefer Bereshit, at the beginning, there are 3 mitzvot. There's the mitzvah of Pururavu. There is the mitzvah of Brit Milah, that we have the mitzvah of procreating. And then we have the mitzvah of Brit Milah, which is the mitzvah of giving a brit to every male child on the 8th day. And of course, its accompanying details. And then the third mitzvah is that we don't eat from a certain nerve, sciatic nerve perhaps, of the animal after it's slaughtered. And that's to remind us of Yaakov limping when he himself struggled with the man angel way back in Vayishlach. There are only 3 mitzvot that we have in Sefer Bereshit. And the 613 mitzvot 610 other mitzvot are found in Shemot, Vayikra, Bamidbar, and Devarim. And the mitzvot themselves, often it's called Mishneh Torah, the repetition of the Torah, in that many of the mitzvot were mentioned previously, but yet they are then expanded upon as the Jews are about to enter Eretz Yisrael. And that's why it's called Mishneh Torah. Because it mentions mitzvot that were previously mentioned or alluded to, and it gives them more in detail. Plus, other mitzvot were added as the Jews were about to enter Eretz Yisrael, many of the mitzvot which have to do with what the Jews would be doing in Eretz Yisrael, setting up justices, courts of justice, and various other things. Those mitzvot are either introduced in Sefer Devarim or they're expanded upon. That's what we call our 5 books of the Torah. The difference is as follows. In our common language, Bereshit, Shemot, Vayikra, Bamidbar, Devarim, that refers to the first, to a principal word that may well have been found in those texts. On the other hand, the Midrash seeks to talk about the content. Vayikra, the third book, would be Torah Kohanim, the laws that the Kohanim had to know inside out when it came to the Beit HaMikdash. And then Bamidbar, the content was the Jews were counted. And in Devarim, of course, you have principally a statement of many mitzvot which we have. And so therefore, it is called Mishneh Torah. We're opening tonight with Sefer HaGeulah, Book of Redemption. And therefore, the Medrash refers, as it does with all of the books, its title is is derived from the content of the work. And of course, Sefer Shemot derives its name of Sefer HaGeulah because of its content of leaving Mitzrayim and the aftermath which followed. So that's the introduction to our Sefer here. Now, the beginning of the Sefer talks about the Jews multiplying very quickly, that in fact Paro decides that they may well overtake the Egyptians, and so therefore he embarks upon a policy of limiting birth and taking their resources and making them slaves. And that happens. Of course, we know at the very beginning of the second chapter of Shemot, Moshe Rabbeinu has an encounter with an Egyptian beating a Jew. When he went out, as I've mentioned in the past, when he went out, he was probably a young man, probably around the age of 20, and he already was princely in his nature. And he sees an Egyptian man beating a Jew among many Jews who were there enslaved that he could see in the field. And he feared for the Jew's life. And in this first encounter, he killed the Egyptian. The second encounter, he runs away. I mean, the second encounter is the next day, where he sees two Jews who are fighting, but not physically fighting, but about to engage in physical quarrel. And Moshe Rabbeinu said, Rasha lama takereyecha. Why would you entertain the notion of hitting your friend? And then, of course, the answer that he got, Chazal say that it was Datan and Aviram. The answer that he got was, in effect, who made you boss? Are you going to kill me as you killed the Egyptian yesterday? And the phrase is, Hal hargeni ata omer, kasher harakta et hamitzri. Are you going to kill me by saying, just as you killed the Egyptian? From here, Rashi says that brings the famous medrash that says Moshe Rabbeinu killed the Egyptian with the Shem HaMeforash, with the divine name of God, the full name of God, and it's drash. It's not pshat, because for a number of reasons. But again, it doesn't mean he didn't. It just means that it would be drash. And I've mentioned a number of times also that midrash and drash is what I call in the import-export industry. It either imports an idea that's not part of the text, or it exports us to another time and place. If you want to know whether something is not pshat, and if it's drash, that usually is what you'll find. Number one, that an idea that is not at all evident in the text is brought into the text, or we are transformed, or we are sent to another time and place. Now, in this case, we don't have much reason to believe that Moshe Rabbeinu knew the Shem HaMeforash, and therefore that would make it drash. Doesn't mean he didn't. It just means that we have no evidence, no prior evidence, no current evidence that Moshe Rabbeinu knew the Shem HaMeforash, the ineffable name of God. The second thing is that when it says Halahargeni ata omer, is it to kill me, you say? That's a very common usage. We say, are you saying that you're going to do this? Even if you didn't say it. And the Meforshim, who are the Pashtanim, the ones who look for, not for the Midrash, but who try to look for what we call pshat, that which adheres closest to the context. People oftentimes say, are you saying that? And they really mean to say, do you mean to indicate? But it doesn't mean that you're saying necessarily. Could be, or it could be not. So Moshe Rabbeinu runs away, and we don't know the exact amount of time. It's probably could be as much as 60 years, because we know that Moshe Rabbeinu was 80 years old when he got the call to take the Jews out of Mitzrayim. So if we can accept the fact that he was probably around the age of 20, that would be a 60-year lapse, of which the Torah tells us virtually nothing. The Medrash fills in the gaps, which we're not going to do right now. that he may have become a king of Ethiopia, any number of possibilities. But it seems that the Torah did not consider that of prime importance for us. What is of prime importance is the third intervention, which really is literally is just a couple of psukim away of the first two interventions on behalf of people who were in trouble. And that was when he saved the daughters of Yitro, or the granddaughters, the daughters of Yitro, from losing their flock or being, of course, humiliated when the shepherds, who were bullies, simply bullies, chased them away. And Moshe Rabbeinu didn't know any of them. And yet the Torah tells, Vayakom Moshe Vayoshian. He got up simply and he saved them. He did what was necessary to prevent any further aggression on the part of these shepherds. And so now we have three interventions. The first one is Moshe Rabbeinu sees an Egyptian killing a Jew or hitting a Jew, bringing him almost to the verge of death. Moshe Rabbeinu kills the Egyptian. The second intervention is that he sees two Jews fighting. He intervenes with words, trying to reason with them. The third intervention is, again, even though in terms of psukim, it's only a couple of psukim later, but probably in terms of years of his life, many years later, he sees two groups of non-Jewish people he doesn't know who they are, and yet when he sees injustice, he cannot look away. He literally, because apparently he was a man of great strength and great dedication to the cause of justice, he actually saved them. Seth the Sforno says he did what he had to do in each case. In one case he killed, in the second case he tried to reason, and in the third case, the Torah doesn't tell him exactly what, but he did what was necessary to save these women from their danger or difficulty. Moshe Rabbeinu lives then in the house of Yitro, the father of these women, and he marries Tzipporah, and Tzipporah becomes, he and Tzipporah now have the child whom they named Gershom. Now we're going to pick up the story in Perek Gimel, Pasuk Aleph. Here we are. Now, the pasuk begins in an unusual usage. Umoshe haya ro'eh et tzon yitro chotno. Moshe was shepherding the flock of Yitro, his father-in-law, because remember he married Tzipporah, Kohen Midyan, vayinhag et hatzon, and he led the sheep achar hamidbar. Now the word achar usually means after, but we could say means beyond the desert. Vayavo el har ha'elohim choreva. And he came to the mountain, which was known then, even then, was known as the mountain of God. Yitro was a Kohen. Yitro was some form of a spiritual leader of the Midianites who were there. He was, according to Chazal, he was deposed for various different reasons, but at any rate, he still has the title. Moshe Rabbeinu tends to the flock, and he's beyond the desert. Vayera malach Hashem elav, and a malach Hashem, an angel of God appeared elav to him, belabat eish, in the flame of fire, mitoch hasneh, from the midst of the bush. Many people feel it was a thorn bush. That Chazal say that this bush is a thorn bush is with ease, you can put your hand into the bush. You don't feel anything. But when you try to extricate your hand from there, of course, you feel great pain from the thorns. And that's the way the Jews entered Egypt. They entered Egypt relatively easily. But then once they became entrapped and enslaved, went to extricate them was difficult. They could not get out by themselves. He saw that the bush was burning with fire, but the bush was not consumed. Now, for those who are interested in terms of the Hebrew, the vav in vehasneh does not mean and the bush, it means but. It's a contrasting vav. Vehasneh einenu ukal. The bush itself was not consumed. And then Moshe says, Vayomer Moshe asurana. Let me turn away. And I will see et hamareh gadol hazeh, that I should see this unusual sight. Madua lo yiv'ar hasneh. Why is the bush not consumed? Now, Rabbi Soloveitchik, my Rebbe, wrote a number of essays or articles in English, as well as, of course, in Hebrew. And one of them deals with this very incident that Moshe Rabbeinu encountered the bush, the sneh. And Rabbi said, why would somebody turn away? You would expect when we see something that's unusual, we may sort of gravitate toward it, not to turn away from it. And Rabbi says it is the product of human nature that when we see something which is a natural phenomenon, something which is which could be explained, we go toward it. That he says, Rabbi says, that has to do with taking a look at science or other physical phenomena. Namely, I need a microscope here. I'm not going to step back. I really want to get closer. I want to see what it is like. But Rabbi said, when you come to things that are miraculous or things that are supernatural, it is best to step back, to see the big picture. Even though a mountain itself, of course, is quite natural, to see a mountain really up close, standing, let's say, at its base, you sometimes cannot see the spectacular nature of that mountain. But when you step back, or in some cases you go miles back, you can see it much more, its magnificence. And so Moshe Rabbeinu immediately sensed, of course, that this sneh, this bush that was burning but not consumed, is not a natural phenomenon. Now, there are several reasons that are given why Moshe Rabbeinu went achar hamidbar, beyond the desert. Rashi says very simply, he led the sheep away because he was concerned for other people's property. Because even in the desert, by the way, even in the desert, nomads and others they will stake out places for themselves, and it becomes somewhat their property. So he did not want the sheep to graze where people may have claimed it to be theirs. That's Rashi. Laharchikam min hagezel, so that they should not be that Yitro's flock should not engage in taking food from others or property from others. However, the Malbim says that no, that really the reason he went beyond the desert is because he treated the sheep as his own, even though they were his father-in-law's sheep, Yitro's sheep. He felt that that beyond the desert, there would be better grazing, and therefore it would be better for the sheep and therefore better for his father-in-law. So that's two views. A third view is the view of the Netziv. The Netziv says to us, now that this is Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, who was the last Rosh HaYeshiva of the Volozhner Yeshiva. He actually was the one who closed it. It was known as, it was considered to be the greatest of the yeshivot of Europe. Of course, if you went to Telz, you felt Telz was the greater one. You went if you went to Baranovich, you may well have thought Baranovich was it. But generally speaking, Volozhin had had a very an exceptional name. So the Netziv, Rabbi Berlin, says the following. Shehaya mishtadel lahanig b'makom shehu yoter midbar. He wanted to take them further away to a place that was achar midbar, meaning to say beyond, not physically beyond the desert, but beyond what the normal parameters of the desert were. Why? Kedei sheyuchal lehitboded, so that he might be able to isolate himself and to contemplate and have introspection, v'lachkor achar elokut, to contemplate God. Now, it's, by the way, none of these are contradictory. Because they're not contradictory, they could all be true. Those could all have been Moshe Rabbeinu's motivation, to protect the sheep, to protect others' property, and also so that he should be able to do what he did, it seems naturally, to contemplate. Now, I was once in Eretz Israel, and I decided to take a tour with a tour guide of the Negev. Not all of the Negev, just as a part of the Negev. And I was very excited about it. I had not really spent much time in the Negev. And he takes us out, brings us in a bus. There were about 20 of us. Bus stops, we get out, and he says, and we're walking toward a certain location. We didn't know exactly where it was. And there were a lot of questions I wanted to ask him. What is that flower there? What is that plant? What is this? What? Yeah, nothing. Just went straight on. And I'm thinking to myself, this was a colossal waste of money. If he's a tour guide, he should be telling me what type of a plant this is, where it grows, why it grows, what is it used for? Not nothing. He finally gets to the location that he wants to, that he wanted us to get to. And he said to you, many of you have noticed that I haven't spent a lot of time talking about the flora and the fauna of the desert. I haven't done that. And I'll tell you why. He said that you can easily get in other places. He said, what I want you to do is I could talk to you, but I want the desert to talk to you. So he lined us up and he said, I'm going to tell you to go out, just find any place that you want in the desert, sit down and think. Thinking is hard for me to do when I'm all alone. But I went. We waited till the first person is out 10 steps. Then finally it was my turn. I went out. And I went and I actually got to a ravine, which was a deep, steep ravine. And I sat down. And at that time in my life, I had things that I really did have to contemplate. And I really did have to think about. And the desert began to talk to me. First of all, if you've ever been in the desert without some, shall we say, some tour guide jabbering in your ear, which is also nice, by the way, but just to listen to the silence, I guess, as Simon and Garfunkel would say, literally the sound of silence. And that allowed me to clear my mind and to think about life as I knew it then, and to make decisions about myself and my life. And I found that to be one of the most powerful, I'd say probably we're there about a half hour, one of the most powerful moments of my life. And then I saw the Netziv, and the Netziv said, Moshe Rabbeinu went out to the desert, lehitboded, to commune with God, to spend his time in introspection, thinking, looking inward. And it's almost like, I might add, it's almost like when you really get into introspection, it's sort of like a form of physics, even though it's not physics. The more compressed you become thinking inward, that allows you to branch out even more outward. That's literally what I found. No doubt, Moshe Rabbeinu on a much, much higher level experienced that. Now, when I want to talk to you just for a moment about the very first pasuk, Umoshe haya ro'eh etzom. The word, it's a very unusual phrase. Moshe was shepherding, or Moshe was the shepherd. Now, Chazal tell us, first of all, that the word haya, the phrase haya, is an existential phrase. What do I mean by that? I mean that the pasuk is telling us not what Moshe Rabbeinu did, but what he was. Moshe haya. Moshe Rabbeinu's entire essence was that of being a shepherd. What does a shepherd do? It protects the sheep. He protects the sheep, and the shepherd, of course, prevents them from doing wrong. That's what a shepherd does. And that's what Moshe Rabbeinu was. His essence was haya. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes to him, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes to him and tells him, I want you to lead the Jews out of Egypt. And Moshe says, what shall I call you, God? And he says, tell them, Eheyeh asher eheyeh. Now, I will be what I will be seems to be a very, it's like when we find nowadays modern people, ball players and others say, it is what it is, which is a very philosophical way of saying, I have no idea what's going on. But that is not what Eheyeh asher eheyeh is. And I saw in the Rabbi Yaakov Mecklenburg, the Ketav Kabbalah, he said in Yiddish, what does it mean? Eheyeh asher eheyeh. Ich will sein, was ich ken sein, was ich will sein. I can be what I will to be. Ich ken sein, was ich will sein. I can be what I will to be. Only God can say that. The rest of us cannot say, I can be what I will to be. Will is very nice, and it's probably a prerequisite to becoming something, but it doesn't mean. Only God can say that. By his very word, things come into being. We as human beings can become godlike. And therefore, what we need to be able to say is Moshe Rabbeinu discovered, when he, and with this I'll conclude, Moshe Rabbeinu, when he hit the Egyptian way back 60 years before, and he saw, and the next day, Jews who were fighting, and Moshe Rabbeinu now really had no identity. He wasn't an Egyptian because he couldn't identify with all of the evil. And he had not yet established his own identity because he wasn't around Jews. In order for a Jew to be a Jew, we have to be in a Jewish community, and he wasn't. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells him that you now are going to establish your identity. Just as I, God, am Yeh, and then Ho, and then Va, or Eheyeh. All of that means being, existence. Now you, from this point on, you Moshe, you must establish who you are. You must establish, not enough to throw off the Egyptian identity. You must now spend the rest of your life now under your new assumed identity, which is the correct one. If you are a Jew, not only are you a Jew, you are the very person who will be the Redeemer of Israel. So that's the beginning of this week's Parsha. And now I also want to point out that because of the COVID and the various situations in Eretz Yisrael, we will not be going to Eretz Yisrael, my wife and I. So we won't, we're disappointed that we won't be able to partake in the wedding itself, but we'll do it through Zoom. Hashem has given us the bracha of Zoom. And therefore, we're not going to miss any weeks at all. I intend to continue each Wednesday evening for the foreseeable future, unless something else comes up at another time. So everyone, I want to wish everybody Shabbat Shalom, and Mi'at Hashem, we'll see you over the course of the next week.
Have a good Shabbos. Thank you so much.
Good Shabbos.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You're welcome. My pleasure. Good Shabbos, everyone. Good Shabbos.